Thank you very much for inviting me and hosting me here today. So my name is Mark Thomas. I'm the CTO for cybersecurity at Dimension Data globally. And for the past 5 years or so, I've been producing these global threat intelligence reports in collaboration with NTT. So today, what I'm going to cover are some of the key insights that we've seen right across our client base, and some of the recommendations that we've been making to our clients around how you improve your security posture with the growing threat landscape in mind. So in terms of where we're actually collecting the data from, as I said, we've been doing this for 5 years. Every year that we produce a report, we add additional data sources, additional data sets, because we're interested in understanding how the threat landscape is changing, and so we have to look at things through a unique perspective each time. So in terms of our capabilities, we have 10 SOCs globally. So a SOC is something that we use to collect threat logs from our clients. We analyze that, we correlate it against threat intelligence lists to understand what the adversary is doing. And we also have 7 research and development centers right across the globe, and we use that capability to come up with new types of technologies to understand and integrate these new innovations around how we detect threats that are crossing our clients' environment. And for this year, what we've actually incorporated is over 140 benchmark assessments that has allowed us to measure or benchmark the security posture of our clients. So what we've tried to achieve here is to understand not only what is the adversary trying to do against our clients in terms of that threat landscape, but how are clients prepared, or how ready are they to actually face those threats. So in terms of the data sources themselves, so obviously we're collecting log data and network packet captures from our clients right across the globe. We also have an incident response capability that allows us to actually look at some of the breaches that clients or prospective clients may be going toward, understand what the tool sets that the adversary has used, what the tactics, the techniques and procedures that they've engaged with to target that organization. And so we can analyze all that and build out more of a capability to understand the motivations, the intentions and the capabilities of the threat adversary. As part of NTT Security, we also have something called the Global Threat Intelligence Center, which is a dedicated team who analyze and curate all the data that we have access to. So in NTT, we actually see over 40% of the global internet backbone. So we, at any point in time, can take a snapshot to see what threats are crossing our network based on machine learning and all the telemetry that we have access to. So the GTIC is responsible for curating that data and analyzing that and then correlating that with what we see from our clients' enablement, so that we can uncover new threats that may not have been picked up by traditional security controls. And as I said, our cybersecurity advisory benchmark, it's a consulting engagement that we deliver to clients, and that comprises of hundreds of different questions that we use to understand what their security posture is, what their target ambition is, because every client has a different target ambition. No clients seem to want to be at the fully optimized state, what we call a level 5, because they simply don't have unlimited budgets, and people have to work within a budget and understand how they can prioritize the investments that they're making to improve the security posture that they have. Now, the GTIC themselves, they analyze not only malware data and network packets, but they also analyze that incident response data as well. So that's really our intelligence head, where we can analyze all of that data, produce additional context, and we're also sharing that data as well. And I think today we're here with public, the government, the private industry, and academia. And it's important to understand that threat intelligence is something that we need to share together. We need to collect, and we need to be able to distribute that if we have any chance to neutralize the adversary. Because if more people understand what threats are taking place within their environment, then they can proactively go out and detect and to respond to those threats in an automated fashion. So Dimension Data and NTT are a part of the Cyber Threat Alliance, as well as Symantec. So we do exchange threat intelligence. So all of the valuable data that we have, we actually provide back to the commercial. So what I'm here today is really to discuss some of the key findings from this report that we've produced. So year after year, we tend to see slight variations. Some things are always pretty stock and standard. If you have a look at the vulnerabilities here, year after year we see vulnerabilities increasing, and 2018 was absolutely no different, and it was really the first year that we've seen that topping. It's the highest amount of vulnerabilities recorded that we've ever seen before. So the question that I was asked yesterday at the breakfast is, are we getting better at security? And if you base that purely on the number of vulnerabilities that have been discovered in applications and operating systems, then the answer is no. Cryptojacking, which is a new type of threat, and we'll get into this a bit later what that is, but we've actually seen an increase of 459% year on year, which is absolutely significant trend that is affecting specific sectors. Technology and education were caught off guard. So the question that you need to be asking yourselves is, do you have the right controls in place to be able to detect those new types of threats? And when it comes to web applications and application attacks, we've actually seen that double year on year as well. So data and applications, they're now migrating to cloud-based environments because you may not be in charge of the total security controls in that space. You need to understand what you can do to take additional measures in order to reduce the risk that may be there. Now, credential theft, that's always been around for a very long time. So you think of things like phishing and social engineering style attacks where people are targeting your credentials. What we've seen in the past 12 to 18 months is a shift towards the adversaries targeting cloud-based credentials. So as you migrate your workloads and all your applications to cloud-based environments, adversaries are now following suit. So the number one credential that they're now after is actually cloud-based credentials. So that's something that you really have to be aware of. Year after year, we tend to see the same sectors being the most targeted, finance generally topping the list, and that's really due to the value of the data that they hold and process and store, and that's credit card data. It's personally identifiable information. So that has tremendous value for the adversary to target, and then potentially to monetize, or then potentially to target you directly and look to engage in wire transfers, transferring their money or your money into their own account. Technology sector, you tend to see organizations targeted for their intellectual property, because if you can manage to target the likes of a Facebook or an Apple and embed malicious software in their code, well, all of a sudden you get access to their entire user base with your malware. So we tend to see a massive increase in attacks targeting the technology sector. And really, for the first time, we've always seen, also seen the education and government departments now in the top 5, most sectors targeted. And I think maybe about 2 years ago when I did one of these reports, we saw Australia actually top the list in terms of education sector targeting. And in the past 6 months or so, the education sector has come forward and they've seen rife threat actors within their environment, mostly from Chinese-based state actors who have undermined their security. They have stolen significant intellectual property and research data from educational institutions and then exfiltrating that back up to China. But now we're actually seeing those types of attacks taking place in a much more widespread, I guess, globally dispersed way. So it's not only just affecting Australia, it's affecting Asia Pacific, it's impacting North America as well. And with all of these, I guess the rise in breaches that we're now hearing about, in part due to mandatory breach notification, many organisations and many countries have now have been impacted by compliance regulation. So the media has started to I guess, publicise these attacks that are taking place. And as a result, it places a lot more pressure on CISOs and the C-suite to act and protect private data and consumer data. But that creates a number of challenges because organisations are already under pressure today with the budgets that they have, but with the increasing regulations that they now must be enforced, that just places a lot of other complexities. But I think it also creates a lot of opportunity for organisations to start to get security on the board level agenda. And generally what we're seeing right across the board is that the cybersecurity ambition, so where clients actually want to be, it's far outpacing where they're currently at. And so if we don't do something about it today, then we'll never be able to catch up to where that security posture needs to be in order to withstand attacks. So in terms of vulnerability growth, 12.5% year-on-year growth. And if you compare that to 2016, it's well over 100% growth. So are we getting better when it comes to patching? The answer is absolutely no. And I believe this is only set to get worse as organisations are now engaged in what we call DevOps or even DevSecOps, where business is placing increased demand and pressure for organisations to create new sources of value and applications, bringing applications faster, or having that speed to market is reducing from years down to months, down to weeks, to even days. So new applications are being spun out and pushed out every couple of days or every couple of hours, depending on the organisation that you're in. And if security is not a part of that process, then that opens you up to a wealth of new vulnerabilities and a whole array of different exposures that adversaries can engage to target your organisation. So in terms of the attacks by sector, finance and technology topping the list, what we decided to do is have a look at how prepared those industries are when it comes to facing those threats. And what we can see here, so on the darker blue, on the right-hand side, you can actually see the current state, or as-is state. The lighter blue is the future or target state ambitions that our clients want to be at. So for example, if you have a look at financial services, their current state maturity is at 1.71 out of potential 5, which is not necessarily the best, and it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. But where they want to be is at about 3.01. So as I said before, organisations don't aim to be at that fully optimised state. They don't have the resources, they don't have the people, they don't have the mandate to be at that optimised state, and that's because of a number of competing agendas. But the question is, are they actually secure against threats? Can they have the right footprint and controls in place in order to prevent all threats? The answer is no. Threats are going to get through, there's no silver bullet. So they've taken a balanced approach to understand where their risk profile is currently at, what their risk appetite is, so how prepared are they to accept that a certain amount of risk will happen and that they're prepared to accept that risk. So what we can see here is that both finance and technology topping the list of most targeted sectors, but they're also the most mature, they're the most prepared to deal with those threats. So what this suggests is that precisely because industries are being rapidly and increasingly targeted, they're being forced to act to improve their security posture so that they can withstand more attacks. Now, if we have a look at the likes of the education sector, coming in at 11% of all attacks that we see globally, they are not in the same position. They're at 1.21 out of a potential 5. So they're less prepared to deal with those attacks. So they have currently the same level of investment to improve their security posture. So they are more likely to be targeted based on the data that we have access to. So in terms of the framework that we use to measure the maturity of organizations, so we have developed our own framework. It's based on the Carnegie Mellon University, the CMMI Index. And we've actually adopted SABSA, which is the Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture approach, where we take a top-down view looking at the security strategy and vision of our clients, and we get right down into the information security framework, the risk management frameworks that they use, as well as the logical security controls that they have in place. And so, based on a number of questions that we ask our clients to understand where they're currently at and where they want to be, we're able to plot them on a scale of 0 to 5. And so we have a very broad baseline of questions that we can go to, from a very generalized question set around the people, process, and technology, or we can take a deep dive into specific modules, the likes of threat intelligence or measuring incident response readiness or Office 365. So that has allowed us to get deeper visibility, deeper context into where clients are currently at and where they aim or where they aspire to be. So in terms of the engagement that we've had with that consulting benchmark, what you can see here is that both finance, technology, and manufacturing are the organizations, are the clients who are coming to us and saying, help us draw out what our security program should look like. Help us to measure where we're currently at so that we can better manage our security footprint. So what this also suggests is that because both finance and technology being the most targeted, they also have the most mature security posture, although it needs significant improvement, but they're also the most engaged. So for these types of organizations to come to us, it means that they already have the business level buy-in, they already have the security investment to engage with us around those security consulting advisories, and prioritize cybersecurity on the boardroom agenda, which I think is the main aspect here on this slide. Organizations who have not engaged with us to help build out their security program are at a far greater risk. And what I can say here is in the business and professional services sector, although they were the third highest targeted sector last year, they actually don't appear in this chart. So what that suggests is that they have not gained the business level buy-in to improve their security posture at that strategic level. So that places them at greater risk over the next 12 to 18 months. So in terms of global hostile activity, I think by and large part, threats aren't changing. Over the past decade, the majority of attacks are still the same. So what that tends to suggest is that threat actors look at the low-hanging fruit. They don't need to update the tool sets that they're using, the modus operandi, because we as individuals and various clients that we see, they're simply not getting the basics right. They don't have the appropriate cyber hygiene in place. So they can't keep up with all the patches that they need to deploy every Patch Tuesday. They haven't secured their infrastructure as it's being rolled out, and therefore threat actors don't need to necessarily use zero-day exploits to target those organizations. They can use the likes of brute force activity simply to target those organizations. So what that tends to suggest is that people aren't changing their usernames and passwords on systems, they're using the default credentials, and as a result, the threat adversary can simply run a brute force scan, get access to your equipment, and then look to move laterally within your organization and potentially exfiltrate data, escalate privileges, or monitor your users for whatever nefarious purposes that they need to. And in terms of being the most used, attack, it's web applications. As I said before, that has increased twofold over the past 12 months. And again, organizations need to be looking at how you can prevent these attacks from taking place. You don't want to be the low-hanging fruit, so start to think about how you can engage with your IT team, with your security team, to get better patching in place, to improve your processes, to ensure that as assets are rolled out in your organization, that you have a minimum level of security in place. Because ultimately that's going to force the attacker to go away, rethink how they approach your organization. They're going to have to retool. So I talk about the economics of cybercrime. so forcing the adversary to go away, and essentially if it becomes too costly, too complex to target your organisation, then it's more likely that they will have to find a different target other than your organisation. So you simply don't want to be that low-hanging fruit. So in terms of EMEA region, where are the attacks coming from? And most of that is actually from China and the United States. We see similar levels of threats also from a global perspective as well. So I don't think anything there really stands out for us. But when we got into drilling into the data itself, you look at different industries, you look at different regions, the attacks that are leveraged are always different. So here, for example, if you have a look at finance, the top attack in that industry is actually web attacks. Whereas if you have a look at the technology sector, then they tend to see more reconnaissance style of activity. So that's where the adversary is profiling the network to have a look at open ports or potentially exposed services that may be vulnerable, and they're looking to build out a footprint of what your organisation looks like. So the first times that we were doing these reports, we only had to look at it from a global level, but as we get into different regions, different sectors, the attacks that are employed tend to vary. So in terms of the regional insights of what's taking place at a regional level here, and again, it tends to follow what we see from that global perspective, as I said before. So finance, again, topping the list. So adversaries are after your data, they're after your money. No surprises there. Technology sector coming in at number 3, and that's increasing year upon year. And the business and professional services sector, as I said before, they are at greater risk and even more risk within this region than what we see globally, because they come in at number 2 from this regional perspective versus at number 3 from a global perspective. So then we had a look and we ran the clients through our cybersecurity advisory benchmarking question set. And we had a look at how prepared the region is and different industries within this region, and how prepared are they to face that evolving threat landscape. And to our surprise, MEA was actually came out on top. So you actually did beat Australia in this respect. So 1.77 current state versus where they want to be at 3.6. And your actually target ambitions, where you actually want to be, is actually higher than any other region as well, which I thought was quite interesting. Certainly a standout of the data set that we saw here. And then we had a look at what was taking place within the region in finance, technology, and manufacturing, being some of the interesting targets of attack for 2018. And what we can see here is that finance is well prepared to face the evolving threat landscape, coming in at 2.21, where they want to be at a 3.85. So we know that if organisations, if the big banks of South Africa or the MEA region are under attack, they're certainly better prepared today than their counterparts in other regions. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to be targeted or those threats are not going to get through. They will at some point. It just means that they have a more mature people, process and tooling available to them in order to thwart those attacks. So some of the key insights that we see that stand out from us from a regional perspective. In Asia Pacific, what we tend to see is a lot of brute force activity. So they tend not to secure their infrastructure as it gets rolled out. There are many clients in that space who have a very large NTT footprint, but they don't have the resources to change passwords. They don't have that basic cyber hygiene. But that's actually not the case when we look at the EMEA region. What we can see here is that threat actors actually employ denial of service activity. So that's where the adversary is looking to knock your business, knock your organisation offline. So you're unable to conduct your normal business operations. So for us, that was a big standout. It went from kind of a small threat, it went up to 21% for the year. And we haven't seen that type of aggressive activity for a number of years. So for organisations, I guess in this region, you have to start to think about what controls that you have in place to prevent these types of attacks from taking place. Whereas if you're Malaysia or Singapore in the Asia Pacific region, you just have to ensure that you're updating your configuration to prevent against brute force style activity. So, as I mentioned, compliance, it creates complexity, but also opportunity as well. So, we're seeing from right across the board, regulations are increasing. And I think here we have about 7 or 8 different countries who have, over the past 12 months, updated their regulations, updated legislation. From Australia, when it comes to mandatory breach notifications, to Israel, to Philippines, to Canada, everybody's actually doing something around protecting privacy data. So it's creating, I guess, more importance, more dialogue at the boardroom level to ensure that organisations are doing you to protect the organisation from different types of threats that are out there. And this is only set to get worse, I think. There's going to be more regulations, and there's no global consistency when it comes to this. So if you're an organisation with footprints right across the globe, you have to worry not only about GDPR, but it might be mandatory breach notification from Australia. It might be all the different compliance when it comes to PCI, and that creates a lot of challenge. New resources have to be invested in. People need to understand what those mandatory requirements are. But what we're saying is that there needs to be a balance between compliance and cybersecurity, because we see compliance as not cybersecurity. It's there to ensure that there is a business level view to accept and understand what that risk is. But even if you have gone through compliance, that is not going to secure your organisation. The threats move way faster than compliance does, and so you need to keep up at an operational level with the attacks that are taking place. So how do you ensure you get that continuous monitoring in place? Because compliance is not going to protect you. And what we tend to see as well, compliance tends to be a point-in-time assessment. People tend to get everything up to scratch before the auditors come in, and then they can pass the assessment, but as soon as the auditor is gone, processes get lax, people don't do the right configurations, and then they're unsafe for the next 364 days before that auditor comes back in. So what we're saying is that there needs to be continuous compliance in place, there needs to be continuous visibility, continuous assessment in order to improve a client security posture. So some of the big threats that we saw in 2018, cryptojacking, as I said, 459% year on year. That caught both the education and technology sectors off guard. Now there is conversation that cryptojacking or crypto mining or whatever you want to call it is legal or can be illegal, and that certainly can be the case. It's illegal when an adversary targets your systems, implants scripts or malware on those systems, and then uses your resources, your CPU power, your energy to mine cryptocurrency. So that allows them to start to monetize your resources, and then they get the benefit of that because they can convert that into cash. So what we tend to see is a lot of operations called dorm room mining in the education sector specifically, where students will come in with their own laptops. They're leveraging the power from the educational institution, but it's on their own systems. So there is, I guess, some grey area there, whether that's legal or not, but that's essentially allowing them to gain a monetary benefit from your resources. And what we also see is that XMRIC was actually topping the list. So that's cryptocurrency that uses Monero rather than Bitcoin that actually topped the list for this year. And so what we're saying here is that organizations need to have the right controls in place to protect cryptocurrency, because traditional technology doesn't detect this type of activity. It's only cropped up in the last 12 to 18 months. And this has essentially replaced ransomware from a couple of years ago being the #1 type of malware threat that we've seen. So organizations need to start to think about not only how you prevent against ransomware attacks, but how you also add additional capabilities to look at cryptocurrency mining, because it's not as in your face as ransomware would be. It'll sit back leveraging only a couple of % of your CPU, and it's not going to pop up with windows and dialog boxes forcing you to pay anything. It's just using your resources in the background silently. So it tends to be very difficult to detect. Web-based attacks. So what we tend to see is that organizations' digital footprint is increasing. So as that data and applications goes out into the cloud, they tend to maintain hybrid environments. So you already have your on-premise footprint, but that's now getting sprawled out across different cloud environments. So that's increasing your potential attack surface for the adversary to target. And web-based attacks don't target any specific sector. They target everyone right across the board. So as your assets tend to increase over time, as you're processing more data in those business applications, adversaries are following suit. So they're starting to increase their capabilities around scanning your web-based applications, which is really the lifeblood of your systems, particularly when it comes to the finance sector. Because for you to do any type of transaction, you have to log on to the customer portal or your mobile phones, and that's using API, which is connecting back over the web, and adversaries know that. So this is really where they're starting to target. So again, this is where you need to start to think about what web security controls do you have in place? What assets or what types of data protection do you have? Do you have data loss protection? Do you encrypt the data as it's stored on the system? Do you have data at rest? Do you have data applications and services? And so there was a couple of different sectors that were caught off guard here, predominantly the telecommunications industry. And the reason why adversaries want to target the telcos is because of the supply chain. So as organizations access the internet, as consumers, as organizations do, if you actually control the telco, then you can control the traffic that is routed through the telco. You can target managed security service providers, because those managed security service providers look after hundreds, if not thousands, of different other customers. So if you do have access to one organization, then potentially you can gain access to all the rest. So we're definitely seeing different types of targeting towards telcos and the supply chain, particularly around software supply chain at the moment, which again, it's something that organizations haven't really considered over the past few years, but it's only the past 12 or 18 months where we're starting to see a lot more media attention focused on that supply chain. So a lot of organizations are starting to look at threat intelligence, so getting visibility beyond your perimeter. Everyone has been focused on their own internal controls and forgetting about what data may be exposed already on the dark web or in paste bin sites or on social media platforms. So adversaries are looking at how do you target a specific individual. They might log on to LinkedIn, they profile that executive, they'll send him a spear phishing email, and then they'll target him and look to impact that organization that way. But if you can target someone in the telco space, so you're not only targeting one company, you can then potentially target that entire supply chain and all their customers that they have to deal with. So it's better return or better bang for buck for the adversary to engage in that style of activity. So in terms of the recommendations that we've been making over the past couple of years, security really starts with the culture. We can always talk about the different controls that you have to have in place, but when we have a look at all the breaches that are taking place, most of that, I think it's about 70%, actually target people or processes. So if you have the right behaviors in place, ensuring that security is everybody's responsibility, I think that is the first step that people can take in order to improve their security posture. We like to say that humans are the first layer of defense. The more that we educate people around the attacks, the better prepared they are to handle those attacks. And security really has to be secure by design. It has to be embedded within your processes, with people, and the technologies that you use. And you think about you as a consumer, you also are at a position of influence, where you can say to your vendors or your manufacturers that I expect to have security built into my IoT device or to my mobile phone. And the more expectations that we place on vendors and the industry to have security in there by design, the more that they're forced to act, right? And that really creates a competitive differentiator for them, but it also ensures that we are protected and that our data is protected as well. And we also talk about security being holistic and predictive. You can't just have one or two different controls. You have to think about the strategy that you have, the information security framework, and then all of the controls that follow suit after that. You can't take a siloed approach. And then when it comes to the cybersecurity skills gap, we have to start to look at automation. So how do we improve our ability to detect threats and then automate the response? And we're seeing a lot of clients now who have adopted cloud-based infrastructure like so Microsoft Azure and AWS, starting to make use of a lot of the native capabilities that those cloud platforms have around the automation piece. So if there is a huge skills gap, automation is one of the solutions to that challenge. So in terms of the big threats that we saw for the year, and I won't go through each of the potential ways that you can improve the security posture here, but it all starts from best practice security controls in place. And so it's a combination of ensuring that you're enforcing least privilege, you're segmenting your network, you have the right authentication in place, because that ultimately will limit the scope and the impact of that breach if and when it does occur. And there's different types of technologies that you can invest in, which will help augment your people and your processes. But you have to think about this from a holistic perspective. Don't just focus on one, think about it in terms of a defense in-depth approach. So what we do here at NTT in Dimension Data is analyze all of the threats that our clients are experiencing, and we put out different solutions to tackle those threats. So each year we try to understand what's actually taking place, and we build out solutions, which is a combination of technologies and services that our clients can adopt in order to improve their security posture so that they can reduce the scope and impact of the breach. So we provide consulting services as well as managed security services. So if you don't have the skill sets or the expertise or the advanced tooling, we can provide that as a managed service to our clients so that we can help improve their security posture upfront at an accelerated rate. So with all that said, thank you very much for coming. If you want a copy of this report, then there is a Q tag at the bottom there that you can access. So that will go to the global site that we have. Please feel free to reach out to me if you want to access any of our regional reports as well. So we have about 4 or 5 different regional reports as well as a global report. Each provide a different view or different profile into industry as well as the region that we see and the various attacks and maturities that we see taking place. So thank you very much.